afternoon, PSQ Nation. Happy Friday. Today is the last day of the week and we will end it with a productive learning activity. Welcome to the fourth webinar session organized by the Philippine Society for Quality. And we are live via Facebook and YouTube. Please be informed that this webinar is recorded for documentation purposes. I will be your host for today's activity. I am Dr. Zandra Maningas, the Vice President for PQA Administration of the Philippine Society for Quality. This afternoon, we are bringing to you a topic that is relevant and timely, titled Using Technology to Improve Your Early Careers Hiring Process. Our speaker is the Vice President of Sales for SeeMeCV, a software as a service based human resource technology platform that specializes in virtual fairs, video CVs, career portals, and virtual coaching. And our speaker has spent over a decade working in human resource, both in global mobility, human resource technology, and managing recruitment teams in Singapore and China across several functions. So, without further ado, for today's webinar session, Alex Martin. Hi, Mr. Alex.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
The StreamYard space is yours, Sir Alex.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Very nice to meet you all. So I'm streaming here from Singapore. So let me just share my screen and make sure I share the right one. So hopefully everyone can see my presentation there on the right. Oh, marvelous. I can see it too. Excellent. So as I say, today we're talking about using technology to improve your early careers hiring process. Before I dive in, though, I do want to give a big thank you to PSQ for giving me this opportunity to talk to you guys about this topic. It's something I'm very passionate about, not just technology, but effective recruitment. So without further ado, I'm going to actually just kick things off and get us moving. So very briefly, just an introduction to who we are as a business and kind of where this ties into how we operate within this space. Already received a very generous introduction there to our business. Just some topping up on that. So we've been around since 2006. And even though we're Singapore headquartered, we actually deliver solutions all around the world, although Asia is a specific focus for us. And also the Philippines is one of our key markets. And the way in which we operate, a lot of the people in our business come from industry. So myself, as was mentioned, I come from a recruitment background. I'm very passionate about working with our clients to optimize recruitment fairs and virtual recruitment fairs, both during the pandemic and even post-pandemic, so that candidates can get the very most out of their recruitment experience with the brands of our clients, and also that our clients get the most effective opportunity to present themselves and put their best foot forward in a very noisy market. So I don't need to talk too much about myself already. Very generous introduction there. So just in summary of the things I want to be talking about today. So I want to talk about the challenges that recruiters are currently facing in the market, not just in the Philippines, but around the world. There's very similar challenges, actually. I'll talk about technologies within the recruitment funnel. Now, actually, you've got the full recruitment funnel from branding right the way through to hiring and retention. I want to focus today on attraction and screening. This is where you've seen the most rapid development of changes in different technologies and different applications of those technologies. So as well as going through some examples of the types of technologies, I want to spend some time also while I'm going through that, talking about the analytics that you can derive through those technologies and how you can use that to further empower your recruitment process. Then I want to talk about qualifying the right technology for you. So what questions you need to be asking yourself before diving headlong into further investment. And then finally, talking about the fact that most of us have an ATS system or applicant tracking system. So how do we use that to make sure that we're getting the most analytics out of the system? No matter how basic it is, you can usually glean several core analytics from it. And from there, you can understand the story of what's your candidate experience, where are you falling short, and how can you improve your conversions. So a lot to cover today. I am going to be talking through this, and hopefully we will be able to address any questions at the end. So I'll try and leave some room. However, I do believe that you're able to leave comments if you do want to ask questions throughout, and I can hopefully address those also. Otherwise, feel free to leave them for the Q&A at the end. Okay. So in terms of the challenges for early careers recruiters, you guys can obviously read these bullet points for yourself, but what I want to say is that technology has the opportunity to both enable your recruitment teams um, in tackling a lot of these problems, but it also has the ability to frustrate. When we talk about things like too many channels and too many platforms, while each independent platform or software may offer its own merits or virtue in terms of improved branding or increasing the speed of conversion rates, or even if it's just in terms of simplifying analytics. For recruiters, too many platforms can create an additional complexity where they struggle to maximize their work as well. So one of the things which we're seeing now, I think, and one of the things that we need to tackle is that in most markets, campus hiring is increasing, but without a growth in resources. So early careers teams aren't growing, but the demands on them are. So especially when we look at, for example, there are markets. So India is a great example where Bangalore, which has traditionally been almost entirely tech focused in terms of the kind of business processes that are being outsourced there. In Bangalore now, for the first time ever, recruiters outstrip technology candidates in terms of the vacancies, sorry. And so this is where utilizing technology is important, because we also need to avoid recruiter burnout. With RPO businesses as well, saying that they have a higher than ever demand on them for recruitment, we need to figure out what is the smart use of technology where we're enabling our team, we're not giving them too many platforms, but we're also addressing the major problem for them, which is a time-intensive workload, and breaking through the noise and getting noticed so that their time can be spent on more effective aspects of their role. So one of the things that's clear is whether you're breaking through the noise or whether you're making your advertising more impactful. One thing which I am going to talk about this throughout the course of the presentation as well is the employer brand. So a lot of people, you think that employer branding starts at that very first stage. It's the advertising, it's our career page, it's our the job postings, so people can see what we're about and who we are. But if you think about the way that you engage with any other brand, it's a continuous process. So you're familiar with, for example, Cadbury chocolate. But the first time you try Cadbury chocolate, if it's a negative experience, you not only don't buy that again, i.e. don't apply to this company again, but you also tell your friends about it. So this is where technology as well, what we need to be sensitive with is along the way, how does technology change the way in which a candidate engages with our business? Okay. So this was a recent survey that was done in 2021, looking at how the talent acquisition function is utilizing their time. So these are the activities where recruiters were asked to rate from the most amount of time taken to the least. What was their day comprised of? And as you can see, reviewing applicants, finding applicants, and scheduling interviews was a big component of that. But also screening applicants formed quite a large proportion. So the big question we have is, how do we alleviate that? And how do we decide what functions are best done in an automated manner? So for example, in terms of collating and scheduling interviews, and what stuff is value add activity, like the screening that should be done by a person, for example. So I want to talk about the advantages and the risks of using technology for TA before I go into the detail of breaking down some of the individual components. So in terms of the advantages, a lot of times what you're looking to do is you're looking to make the time more effective for your recruiters so they can spend quality time on engagement. But there's also additional advantages as well. The proper utilization of technology can allow you to do things like de-bias decision making. Within the human process, there's a lot of unconscious bias, and this is something which we've become more aware of over recent years. And it's something that through analytics, we can remove from the early stage hiring process through technology. But also, we can use analytics to help us better understand how decisions are being made. We can also use analytics to drive performance and engagement by understanding where our shortfalls are in recruitment, by understanding where we're failing to convert or where we're not gaining traction. We can be a bit more surgical about how we improve our messaging. There's also the matter of consolidating feedback, moving processes forward, minimizing the number of contact points internally to make a decision. It highlights your business as an innovator when you're using technology. Candidates have indicated overwhelmingly that the proper use of technology has been a decision making factor for them in how they view a business. So a business effectively using technology will be seen as an innovator in a very noisy market. And that's also how you differentiate your brand. Again, when we talk about candidate experience, especially in early careers, you're talking about a captive market. This is a market of candidates that are looking for a role. They are speaking to multiple businesses. And the big question is, how are they going to see your brand? How has yours been differentiated? And the proper use of technology can be a big factor of that, especially if you're not one of the kind of home brands. And then finally, removing logistical geographical barriers. Okay, then in terms of the risks, and this is something which we're going to tap on kind of in each one. I want to talk about how technology, when done right, can be very effective and you can meet all these advantages. But there are certain technologies where a misuse of the application can detach your candidate from your brand very early on, which is obviously something you want to avoid. It's high risk. But there's also the risk of excessive workload on your recruiters by creating multiple sources. If they've got applications coming through, omni channels, then they're going into the ATS system. Then they have to go out to another system to do a pre-automated interview. And then there's a psychometric system. And all of these are somehow having to be collated and they're not syncing. You're actually more likely to increase the risk of burnout from your recruiters, while at the same time diluting your candidate experience. Okay. And then there's analysis paralysis. So this is what I find quite funny, which is that especially recently, we've become very, very engaged and very excited by the types of analyses that we can pull from technology. But at the same time, we need to be a bit more frugal with our priorities. What is actually core to our business? Because you can overdo it. You can try and glean data from every single point to the point where it becomes very, very difficult to move forward with a strategy because you're trying to be too surgical. So again, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But essentially, one of the things which I think, and from my experience, I found, is that in terms of the analytics, previously it boiled down to some very simple things. What was the application source? What was the candidate backgrounds? So, for example, which universities provided the most amount of students and who did we hire the most from? Time to hire and cost to hire. Those are usually the metrics that the talent acquisition could boil down to. But now we can focus down on the individual functions, levels of engagement, conversions within the process. And again, as I move forward now, we're going to talk a little bit more about what kind of analytics those look like. So my final lecture on this is keeping your candidate experience front of mind. This is the classic example of the ATS system where a candidate is asked to fill out all these details, upload their CV, and then the next 5 pages of the ATS system are to fill in the same details that were in the CV in a open text format. Now, candidates may or may not understand that the reason for that is obviously to help with parsing, keyword searching, auto matching, and things like this. But again, thinking about the candidate experience, this is a great area where using analytics, you're able to see that there's a very high drop-off rate for candidates who experience this, especially from early careers candidates who are making application after application after application. Okay. So within the recruitment funnel, you essentially have 4 kind of core elements before hiring. There's your branding, there's your attraction, there's your screening, and there's your interviews and conversion. So as mentioned, today I'm going to be focusing mostly on the attracting and screening. I'm not going to go through all of these different areas, but I am going to focus in on a few core new technologies that we're seeing being applied across the talent acquisition function, along with our own experience of kind of what might be things to consider in terms of pros, in terms of cons, and in terms of how to use the data that you can glean from that. So, the first one I want to talk about was webinars with mass engagement and breakout rooms. Now, during COVID, this was, without question, the most popular form of early career talent attraction. This ties with your branding, because obviously this is very early stage messaging about who we are as a business. And it's attraction, it's trying to get them engaged, understand who you are as an organization, and talk about specific functions and roles. So this was very, very common, mostly because it's easy to set up. There's a comfort with technology. All of the students or all of the early careers applicants, they know this tech. They've used this tech. And for the presenter as well, very little training required. The only real setup was getting collateral together and organizing speakers. Okay. And then also one of the things to consider was that there were limitations in terms of, for example, the call to action. So one of the things which companies started to experience, or one of the things that they saw, was that you can have a very powerful webinar, but at the end of the day, there's a gap between getting that person doing the branding and doing the interaction and converting that into the screening process. So how do I get them now from webinar to application? So oftentimes this is done with kind of at the end of the webinar, they invite people to apply. They get automated emails that are reminding them that they can go to the careers site and drop their CV and drop their email and things like that. Drop their CV, drop their application and things like this. But the thing is, that does create somewhat of a gap between your call to action. Beyond that, this is also there can be a gap in terms of building your brand, but not necessarily the relationship. And again, when you understand, for example, when you put yourself in the seat of a candidate, when I'm on my 4th or my 5th webinar, the onus on the presenter to really bring it to the next level and to really make it attractive and compel me to take that next step, that challenge is a lot harder when you're in an environment that is typically overutilized by businesses. So as I say, there's a lot of strong arguments for using webinars and mass engagement, especially in that early stage for branding. And what you've got to figure out if you are going to use this is, how do I create the most effective second stage? How do I, in the shortest period of time, get people from engagement while it's still fresh, they're keen on our business, the messaging is clear, get them from that stage to application? And then in terms of this, what I would also say is that in terms of the analytics garnered from this, it can be very valuable in terms of understanding your position early on. So one of the things which employers, a lot of employers, what they've chosen to do is to also use this almost as a research exercise. So they're using surveys within the environments. They're using polls rather than just post-event surveys, asking qualifying questions like, how well did you know our brand when you signed up? What attracted you to our business? Oftentimes, these webinars, it's a first stage engagement. So this is probably the best opportunity for you to understand how strong your brand power is within the early careers community. So before I've had a chance to say anything, how well do they know who we are? What do they understand about what makes us different? So you might even want to have, for example, as part of your poll or part of your survey, understanding what do you think what do you understand makes us a great employer? And you might be surprised by some of the responses. And that might be a good thing. You might say, well, look, actually, if that's what people are saying, let's change our message to be around that, because that's actually quite powerful. We've just not been communicating it very well. So, or it might be that you say, well, actually, that's not really the message we're going for. We want to be focusing on this. So why is our messaging not getting through? What avenues are we using that are not working? So as I say, that early stage allows you to build a lot of understanding around the perception of your brand, and it can be highly valuable in that sense. So another tool which has been utilized is what SeeMeCV does. So these are immersive virtual career fairs. So for those that have not attended an immersive virtual career fair, what I'm referring to here is this is an environment whereby you have one-on-one chat rooms, group chats, you have booths that are content rich, where you can have individual functions talking about jobs within their function. You can interview with hiring managers, you can download brochures, apply for jobs. You can essentially do all of those one-on-one interview engagements, as well as content engagement with brochures and videos and media content. And then also you have mass engagement. So within the fair, you have the auditorium with pre-recorded videos or webinars or whatever it may be. Now, obviously, I'm a little bit biased here, but I have been honest in some of the challenges or disadvantages also of using immersive virtual career fairs. So in terms of its strength, this covers branding, attraction, and screening, in the sense that this would also typically be your first stage engagement with early careers candidates. And so it's a branded rich environment. So this means that you can choose your messaging. It's content rich. So in terms of videos and brochures, as I've said, but also one-on-one and mass engagement, you have that opportunity. And then there's also clear calls to action, being able to drive conversation to application. And then also, I'll talk a little bit about this in a sec, but the data and analytics that you can garner from an employment fair done right can be very, very powerful in better understanding your business. And then finally, in terms of being able to engage with your brand at their own pace, one of the things which we've seen, and it was quite interesting actually, if you look at the analytics, you do see that there's quite a large proportion of students or early careers candidates that log in very late in the evening after the interviews are all completed, or who log in on the weekend if you leave it running over a Saturday, for example. This is because a lot of them are in class, or they are in they're in their part-time jobs or full-time jobs if they're early careers. And so leaving this online gives them an accessibility of content and the ability to apply, even if you don't have your team there. Okay. Now, that's all the good stuff. So what's the challenge? Probably that's the most expensive solution, because it's very content rich, because there's a high level of configuration and customization. The service level is very high as well, but that means that it obviously comes with a cost. So you will find, for example, that compared to a webinar, this is going to be more costly. So this is again about your business making the right decision about what's the priority for us, what is the analytics we need to track, what is the messaging and how strong is that messaging, and ultimately what is our goal, okay? Because it also takes more time to implement. What I would say though, is that immersive virtual career fairs, one of the kind of myths around this is that they're only right for multinationals. So only if I'm kind of a Coca-Cola or if I'm a Unilever, then this makes sense for me. But for a small business, it's not as effective. What we've actually seen, and also the assumption that it has to be for mass hiring, where I'm hiring on scale. It's only for people who are hiring 100, 200 people, for example. We have actually seen businesses using this as a great way to stand out, a great way to differentiate themselves, and even a great way to launch their brand in a new market where they have only a couple roles. But this is more about building a pipeline. So they're using the virtual career fair to actually encourage students to become part of their talent community, as opposed to just applying for jobs. So these have been used for branding experiences as well as that attraction and screening. Now, I've done well. So as I said, we've had clients. So one who was doing it actually in the Philippines, who managed to, through very tight management of this process, they used immersive virtual career fairs and managed to hire 30 people in 2 weeks. Okay, and they managed to do that through using analytics, because that was their 5th fair. And what they were doing is they were actually being able to go into, at a booth level, for example, what functions are drawing the most of our candidate pool? How much does that tie to the demographics of who's coming to our fairs, and do we need to change our messaging? Then at the booth level, how many people are then viewing the jobs at that booth? And of the jobs, how many people are then going to apply? And by breaking it down, they were able to also look at, for example, how strong was my messaging for this function? Do people understand what a career in HR is with our organization, versus just applying for a job? Have we made it clear that in HR there's talent acquisition, organizational development, learning and development? There's a number of different, obviously, aspects of HR. So that was the kind of level of data that people were able to go into. Now, some of the other exciting stuff that we've seen here is speed hiring interviews. So speed hiring interviews, so for those of you that are familiar with kind of a speed dating concept, it's a very, very similar thing, but conducted online. So these are great if you're doing, for example, high volume recruitment, or if you're at the early stage and this is more about sourcing who's right to bring into our physical event. If we've got a kind of physical interview session happening at our offices, then maybe I want to use speed hiring in order to kind of sift through that and make sure that we're only bringing the best to the actual office, especially in a hybrid environment where you don't necessarily have the logistics to handle large volumes of people. So using speed hiring, you're also able to set these up relatively easily. And then there's also the saving time of the multitude of interviews. You'll remember at the beginning of the presentation, I highlighted that one of the big factors that were taking up candidates' time was the scheduling of interviews. So speed hiring interviews, putting everyone in one place at one time and having these 5-minute interviews that moves you through candidates who are interested in these positions, allows you to kind of remove a lot of that challenge. And one of the downsides, and I'd say just the caution of using these, is that this can feel a bit one-sided for candidates. So when we talk about, for example, and this is why I put this is a good screening technology, but as a branding technology, it's probably not the best, because you don't have that chance usually to have a more in-depth conversation about who you are as a business. It's very much tell me about yourself to the candidate, some quick questions to ascertain whether you're going to be the right person to bring to our office, for example. So with speed hiring interviews, I'd just say this is probably, if you're going to tie things together, for example, you'd have, do the webinars for branding, and then you invite those candidates to the speed interview, for example, or you invite them for the speed interview, but then as part of that, they get a link to join a webinar before the speed interview starts. So again, there are ways to tie these things together so that you're able to maximize the branding and the efficiency for candidates as well as for the employers, while at the same time, just a reminder to be cautious, obviously, of overdoing the number of technologies being utilized. What I would say, though, is that the analytics that you can garner from speed hiring, this allows you to understand your conversion rates really well, but it also allows you to understand your average scores in certain markets. So, for example, you might want to be looking at skill gaps for certain jobs. So, you have a number of tech roles that are open, let's say, and you have X number of applications, but the majority of applications are from those universities. But if you look at the scoring that was taking place in the speed interview for kind of communication or presentation or business acumen, actually, even though we got the most students interested from University A, the highest quality for the soft skill that we're the most particular about joining our business, maybe entrepreneurialism or whatever it may be, is actually coming from University B. So now I know, for example, where I might want to better invest my efforts in terms of talent attraction. These are the kinds of data that you can garner, because speed hiring interviews, typically you can do these rating systems, which allows you to better understand, as I say, your conversions, where are your best candidates coming from, what are the demographics that you're attracting. And then also, this is where, just as an example from a diversity and inclusion perspective, one of the things you might be interested to know, which you can obviously use this technology for quite easily, would be, I might want to say, and we'll use technology again, because technology is obviously one of the STEM professions, which typically is quite male skewed. So what I might want to know as a business is, for example, the way that we're hiring, I want to see, for example, in the demographics, what percentage of applicants were female, and then of the female versus the male candidates, how many of them were then converted to the next stage, or how is the rating of the females versus the males? One of the things that you might uncover, and hopefully this is not the case, but just as an example, is, are there biases in our hiring processes? So once I've gone through this exercise, I might go, okay, well, let's look through some of the CVs of the people who are rejected, and how do they compare to some of the men that were put forward, for example. So not meaning to say that would necessarily be the case, but that's an example of where you can use these analytics to understand where you may be missing out on great hires because of assumptions or whatever it may be. Or it may also help you to understand, as I say, if you're seeing that you're getting a lot of great applicants coming from X background, you might go, well, look, is our marketing targeting people from that background? If that's what is, if the attraction is coming from this particular pool of candidates, let's make sure that the next phase of marketing, we're honing in on that group of candidates, people coming from that university, or people who have done that course, or people who have got, we find that our best candidates, the difference in terms of cost isn't that big between people who have a couple of years of internship versus someone who's still in their first job. However, the performance level of people who have done a couple of years of internship versus are just doing their first job now is immensely higher. So let's focus on our internship programs, for example, things like that. So using that data to allow yourself to be a bit more targeted in how you're doing that initial marketing, branding, and attraction. Then there's asynchronous interviews. So this is something which existed pre-pandemic. It had been going for a number of years before the pandemic began, and it is still increasing in popularity. So an asynchronous interview, for those that may not be aware, this is where candidates get video questions. So this is whereby I get an email from an employer. They say you've been selected for the first round of interview, which will be an asynchronous interview. I, as a candidate, get a list of questions, and I record myself answering those questions. Now, look, it's a big time saver, because in an interview, I used to have this all the time, right, when I was a recruiter. Spent 7 years working as a recruiter in China and Singapore, and it was the same thing, where you have a candidate you're speaking to. You don't necessarily want to be rude, but quite early on, this really isn't the candidate for us. But you're going to have to give them at least a little bit of time. So being able to cut short that time, being able to know in a relatively short period of time, this candidate is appropriate, this one's not appropriate, this one's not. With pre-selected questions, you can almost carve out the key questions that are coming from your business. So, for finance, for example, they might want to ask a question regarding financial planning and analysis. So for our business, if we were facing this kind of problem with a product release, what would be the kind of impact that would make on our balance sheet? Things like this, where very quickly, I don't need to then go, I think they're great, bring them on to my hiring manager, and then the hiring manager says, no, technically they're not a fit. Culturally, yes, you did a great job, but technically they're all wrong. So that's another advantage. So it's great for volume hiring. What I would say is, so I don't want to read all the bullet points to you guys, but what I would say is that it's a technology to be careful of, because it can, as well as in the same way that the speed interviews, it limits your ability to highlight your brand value. I think the biggest risk factor for this is a screening process. And I've experienced this as a candidate as well. And I experienced it when my clients were using this technology. A lot of candidates just don't like it. So bizarre, uncomfortable, and unfriendly were the typical words that I was given by candidates when our clients were using these systems. There were hesitations to move forward because they felt it was quite impersonal, especially for roles that were slightly more senior. And then finally, I'd just say that from a candidate perspective, again, we're remembering that Cadbury example of the first time you're experiencing a brand. If the first time that they're experiencing your brand as a candidate is one-sided, where they're recording themselves and you decide whether it's worth meeting them, it can have a negative impact on how you're perceived. And it's just something to be very conscious of. Because especially as I mentioned before, it's a busy market. You're not the only employer. So there are going to be moments where they go, I can't believe. So those guys, I had a video myself, but, however I remember company B, we had a really nice engagement interaction on whatever platform it may be. So just something to use with care and caution, I'd just say. Okay. And I'd say actually so just tying into this would probably, you could say the same pros and cons here for kind of the pre-qualified chatbots. You see a lot of these chatbots nowadays as well that ask a lot of pre-qualifying questions, where you answer, so for example, what's your salary range? How many years of experience do you have with SQL? Then you have to type your answers. So very similar again from a candidate experience, and what they're going to take away from that. So I also want to talk about psychometric testing as well as skills-based testing. Now, these are two obviously very different components, but I want to put them together because obviously they're similar in nature, but very different in result. I say that skills-based testing, this is nothing new, and this is entirely valuable. As I say, it's one of these things where you've got to choose the right moment to bring it in the process. However, for businesses that for roles which require very specific hard skills, like for example, tech or engineering or things like this, there's an expectation of a skills-based testing. So you wouldn't worry too much about that. What I would say though, is that when we talk about psychometric testing, this is another one to use with caution because it can be valuable, but it can also be, depending on the tool, because there's a lot of tools out there, some are more accurate than others, okay? And generally speaking, the ones that are more accurate, as a general rule, tend to be longer. And again, if this is taking place in the early stages of the recruitment process, it can lead to a dilution of interest, okay? However, if done correctly, these can be highly valuable. So two things that I would recommend with psychometric evaluations. Number one would be that you ensure that you're leaving a bit of wiggle room for candidates. Ideally, you've had a conversation with them first. So this isn't the first interaction you've had with them, but this might be the second interaction whereby you've had a 15-minute screening interview, for example. Then they get the psychometric test, and then they move on to the next stage, rather than the first. And then two things that I would say about that test are you will get a lot more interest from candidates if you offer to share the results with them. So we did a survey a couple of years back when I was with Robert Walters, and we asked candidates, when they did psychometric testing, would they be interested to see the results? And 100% said yes, obviously. But in terms of whether or not they received it, you had, I think it was 60% was either none of the time or some of the time you would get it back. So one of the things that, again, when you think about from a candidate experience, if a candidate has taken the time to fill out the psychometric test so that you can learn more about them, psychometric tests can also be quite revealing to an individual. They might be they are interested to know their own results. So offering to provide those results can increase the number of candidates that will go through the testing, and it'll reduce your drop off at this stage. The other thing that I would say is that I've seen it being used at the end of a process. Unless there is a particular reason to do that, I don't recommend it, because candidates then feel like the ultimate hiring decision is being made by a machine. Candidates are willing to accept that there's a certain amount of automation that takes place throughout a recruitment process with ATS systems and things like this. What candidates don't like is the idea that the yes or no is lying with an algorithm. And so this is where I would encourage you not to use it at the end. However, there is one exception. And that is that if we were talking today about the full talent funnel and we had 3 hours to go through this stuff, and we were talking about retention, so that conversion to hiring and retention. One of the things which can be valuable for psychometric tests as well is using this as a tool for the manager that's going to end up being their day-to-day line manager. So why is that important? So number one, it helps the manager to better understand the individual, what's going to make them perform, what are going to be their drivers, what are going to be their kind of value sets, where are their strengths, where do I need to help them develop. So as a manager, immediately you've got a leg up in terms of helping this individual to be at their best. But also it can help to understand, for example, in terms of the candidate's onboarding experience, because when a candidate's onboarding experience is such that the manager already knows their working style or has a familiarity with it, and especially if a candidate knows that's what the psychometric testing is being used for, it shows a degree of care by the business about making sure that this isn't just about us deciding that you're right for us. It's also about us making sure that we can give the best to you. So psychometric testing, again, being used in the right way can be incredibly valuable. And the longer term cycle of this, and one you need to be careful of, because we've seen this kind of be overdone, is a psychometric testing. You can start to evaluate kind of what kind of characters work best within certain roles in your organization. Now, the reason why I say you have to be careful of that is because that can lead to a lack of diversity in thinking, which has been proven time and again to lead to reduction in productivity. You want to have diverse thinking within your team. So I'd say that that's a form of analytics which can be tempting to use to, again, over filter to the next stage of, I need this kind of person coming from this university who has this kind of background. And the next thing you know, you have a team of very, very similar thinkers, which is not valuable. So in talking about when you're looking at technologies to apply, there's a few different, and I'll whittle this down in my last slide. But there's a few questions that you need to ask both yourself, but also importantly, any potential vendor when you're looking at technology. One of the things which tickles us a little bit is the overuse of the term AI. AI, much like anything else, it's a series of algorithms, it's a series of decisions. So when you have a vendor explaining to you that they're going to have smart matching of candidates to jobs, for example, by their proprietary artificial intelligence tool, you need to dig into that. You need to ask, well, what kind of accuracy can we depend on, and how is the result reached? So, for example, walk me through what the AI does. What is it filtering down? What is it passing? So, for example, if I put up a sales job, and the system is going to start recommending candidates, how is it making that decision? Because if it boils down to the fact that it's going to be a series of keyword searches and things like this, one of the problems with that, obviously, is that you might end up, in an attempt to spare yourself time of looking through irrelevant candidates, you may end up actually losing relevant candidates. And the noise that you get from irrelevant candidates that just happen to have used those same keywords can dilute the entire value. So do dig into that with any software provider who says they have AI. Also, go through the user experience. So think about this if you're a decision maker and this is going to be used by your team, walk through from that whole talent funnel, from branding, attraction, screening, interviewing and selection, and then hiring. what am I having to do with that CV, with that profile, with that data? If I'm bringing this on, does that integrate into my other systems? Or am I going to find that now my recruiter has to manually be porting data from that system to that system, and we're actually going to end up losing information. We're going to be losing metrics which are important to us. And then also from a candidate's perspective, okay, so I'm going to, if I'm university student, okay, so I apply on this careers website, then I have to go to the webinar, but I fill out a registration form for the webinar. Then at the webinar, I get invited to the speed interview, but I need to create an account for the speed interview. Then after the speed interview, then it goes back to the ATS system where I initially applied before, and then it goes back to normal in terms of emails and video interviews. Try and work your way through those user experiences and where the potential drop-off points might be. So, and that's also something, once you implement technology, ideally you've already been tracking a lot of these conversions of how many people do we get from here to here to here. And if you're implementing a technology and you're finding there's a drop-off, and that drop-off is not because you're getting better at screening, but because you're losing candidate interest and they're not participating, that's something that you need to be very cognizant of. So before you're implementing this technology, you should be understanding what your current metrics are like so that you can measure how the improvement is. You need to ask them about security and ownership of data. Now, this is obviously most businesses, any technology business, they should have all of this information available and ready for you to explain how they deal with data. Because obviously, if they're doing this on your behalf, what you don't want to have is the risk that they are holding on to personal data of students that does not belong to them. So ask them how long they hold on to that data, in what manner is it stored, how secure is that, what happens to the data after the event. These are the kinds of questions which are very important. Okay. How do my candidates rate their experience? So this is actually something which is, as you're implementing these technologies, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, is making sure you're getting constant feedback. So I'll skip this one. So how tech proficient are my users? Are your recruiters going to be able to use the platform? Is it complex? Is it simple? Is it based off something they've seen before? Okay, filtering algorithms, very similar to AI. Is this going to lose me candidates that have transferable skills? Because obviously one of the things which we're noting in the recruitment world over the last kind of 5 years or so is that with the talent crunch, you're finding more than ever companies are hiring for transferable skills. So it doesn't necessarily have to tick all these boxes in the JD, but it's more about, do they show initiative, drive, the ability to work in ambiguous environments. That stuff is probably not going to turn up in a filtering algorithm, but deciding whether or not they click the right industry type for their profile is. So that's something to just be very conscious of as well, about what you might lose in implementing any kind of filtering. Most importantly, how am I going to measure my ROI? If we're going to implement this technology, what am I trying to solve and how do I measure that result? And how do I quantify that return on investment? And then finally, just a couple of things. So I'd actually just say the two most important things after that is understanding the smooth transfer of data, feedback, and analytics. As talent acquisition professionals, more than ever, you're expected to be able to tell a story about where you are strong in your recruitment process, where your gaps are in the recruitment process, and what you're doing to address them. So if you're implementing new technologies that now create these black holes or gaps in your ATS, for example, where you're currently tracking this stuff, then you've got to ask yourself, how smooth is it for me to make sure I'm not going to lose that data or analytics between the systems that I'm using? Because if you lose that, you lose the ability to storytell, but you also lose the ability to troubleshoot. And then finally, understanding if it's configurable to your needs. Your business will not necessarily have the same challenges or the same priorities as their other clients. So you want to understand how can I change? This can be very simple things like what are the calls to action? Well, what we're doing is we're doing this, and this will be followed by this event. So rather than shortlisting, what I want to do is I want this to send an automated invite to our event, for example, if I click invite. So things like this, these are the types of questions that you want to explore as well. Now, as I mentioned, this is just a couple more slides, I promise. I know I've been going on a bit, in terms of your ATS, so we've been talking about kind of a lot of kind of high-level alternative products that you can use, but most of the people on the call today will be using an ATS, an applicant tracking system. And while I'm sure most of you are tracking this stuff, the most important thing is to talk about what we do with this information and what kind of messaging to review. If I have, for example, inviting people to attend webinars or inviting people to attend virtual career fairs or first round interviews even, I look at the number of people who demonstrate interest versus the number of people who actually attend or turn up. And I need to start asking myself if it's, if there's a percentage lower than what I would expect, virtual career fair, about 70%, for example, then I need to look at, well, what's the pre-event marketing? How impactful was that? How clear was our messaging about what people could do there? Did they know that they could actually get interviewed on the spot if they attended this event? Have we got the season and the timing right? Have we actually managed to book this during an exam season when no one's going to be available? So we had lots of people demonstrate interest, but in the end, they're so dead from their exams that the last thing they want to do is have an interview. The applications, so how many people visiting my career site or career fair are actually then applying? Well, you want to be asking yourself, well, how clear were our opportunities? How clear was our brand messaging? If people are visiting our career fairs, they're visiting my career site, but I've got a very low level of actual applications across any function, then I need to understand, again, how are people seeing me as an employer? And this might be an opportunity whereby, for example, if you're getting a high level of participation, but a low level of application, maybe that's also where you start looking at the demographics. You run a webinar, for example, a career site, you can only learn so much, but maybe you run a webinar just so you can understand what's the demographics, who's attracted to my brand, what's their background, and what are the jobs that we're currently offering. And if there's a mismatch, then maybe you understand it better. But if there's a match, then you need to understand, well, there's some gap in our messaging where we're attracting the right people, but once they're learning about our roles and our careers and the opportunities, they're not pulling the trigger. And that usually would be, for example, a lack of clarity about upward progression. It may be that you haven't highlighted, for example, the story of the business in terms of the leadership that exists within the business, which is a core decision factor for many candidates. Or it might be that your message just isn't clear about what this person will be doing in the business. Is your JD just a job description that's got 5 bullet points of you'll do this, 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 and this, and you need to have this, 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 and this experience? Is there storytelling about who you are, what you're going to be doing, who you're going to be working with? Okay. Then interview 1. So how many applicants are getting invited for this interview and how many are getting passed and who's rejecting whom? So one of the things that we used to look at, for example, when we were in recruitment, is we looked at the interview process. So we call them CCM, so it's a client candidate meeting. So CCM 1, 2, 3, for example, and then onwards. And you'd usually be able to, if you found that there was a gap at a certain point, you'd be able to start understanding what the issues were. If it was from application to interview not taking place, there's been a misunderstanding of the requirements. There's not very clear interview. Typically, the recruiter has not fully understood the technical requirements or what it is that the business is looking for. So they may understand very clearly what we want as a business in terms of person, in terms of culture, in terms of softer skills, but they're not very well enabled in testing technical skills. So that might be where, again, you look at, okay, well, do we need skills-based testing so that we can screen this portion initially and make sure that everyone's time is being valued here? Or, for example, it might be that if you're getting a lot of rejections after that point, or you're getting a lot of people who aren't going through to the next level, okay, how soon after the interview did we get back to them? It's another question you have to be asking yourself. Or, for example, how well is our recruiter selling the vision and opportunity of our business? And how clear were we in what the opportunity is? And then after that point, you're starting to look at, is it too many interviews? Have we got too many interviews? Is it taking too long to get from start to finish? And are our team members clear on the decision-making protocol? So, for example, if we've got 5 people and all 5 people need to come to a consensus, you're delaying a whole process because you've got 5 people who then need to meet up at the end and kind of go, well, I thought this, or you thought that. Oh, okay. I don't know. It was 3 weeks ago. I don't really remember what he said to that question. So if you've got feedback that's being consolidated somewhere with recommendations and you're saying, like, look, as long as the line manager says yes and the line manager's boss says yes, it's a hire. So there's a clear decision-making protocol. And then finally, if you're losing out in the kind of offer to hire stage, very simply, it's typically you're going to be looking at the competitiveness of the offer, the attractiveness of your brand versus your competitors who are in the market, the time to hire, and also the line managers. So, for example, they will have typically met their line manager. Is that usually kind of a reason why that typically might be a reason why they don't ultimately reject the offer? If it's not compensation based, 9 times out of 10, it's leader based. It's I'm not sure I could work for that person. So this is an example of how, even with the most basic ATS system, you can start to track the stages and then understand the story of where you need to adapt. And I'm conscious I'm running out of time, so I'm going to be very, very quick on these last 2 slides. So I just want to talk about additional opportunities for analytics and using your tech. So like I said before, in summary, demographics, who is your brand attracting? What's the volume versus the quality of who's coming into your events, and how do I need to change my branding and my marketing to attract a different type of demographic if needed, and which type of demographic is succeeding, and how do I improve their attraction? Diversity and inclusion, we've talked a little bit about that, and understanding where are my best sources of diverse talent. So are there universities that have, they have a very high level of female candidates within their tech talent, for example, engineering talent. So we want to work more with that university and maybe offer exclusive first chance opportunities at internships with our business to that university to try and get them in at the very earliest stage of them joining, because we know that the women that come out of that university usually are top notch. So rather than waiting until the very end, why don't we say that we offer to that university that students from their first time in the business will give them a special internship. We'll partner with that university to help them develop that talent, so that also I'm getting my branding into that talent pool very early on, and create a bit of competition around working for our brand as well. Functions of weaker appeal. So this is also where understanding, your brand messaging about you as a business may be very strong, but people may not understand, and typically finance and HR, at least from my experience, because I recruited both of those, typically the most misunderstood, and typically the ones where you need to have very clear and impactful messaging about how finance and HR is within our business. This is not an administrative role, this is a business role. This is where you'll be supporting critical decision making with regard to talent or investment or whatever it may be, because typically that's where you need the most work in that branding and in that messaging. And the more that you can get that, the more that you can enhance that brand through, like say, early stage internships, or through when you're doing these career fairs, having a myth busting session with a Q&A session with recent graduates, talking about their experience joining the finance team, the kind of stuff they've been working on. That kind of stuff is going to be a harder slog, but it's incredibly important. And then finally, constant feedback. So one of the things that I experienced when I was a candidate in one particular interview process was that at every stage of the way, within like 12 hours of the interview or 12 hours of the test, I was given a feedback form, where essentially it would ask me the same few questions with a couple tweaks, but it was usually kind of, after your interview today, how well do you think you understand our brand? How interested are you in moving to the next stage? What could we have done better? What was your impression of the interviewer that you met, and things like this? And this is all guaranteed to be anonymous. Whether it was or not, I'm not sure. But for me as a candidate, I felt like they were interested, and for them as a business, they were able to adjust accordingly. Okay, last slide. So in terms of what to do now, as I say, I've thrown a load of kind of just thoughts at you essentially from experience. But I'd say that what you need to do now is that before you start deciding on metrics or what you want to measure, first identify your challenge. And if you can't identify your challenge, understand what metrics you're going to need in order to identify it, because you have to start from the challenge point. Analytics and technology, it's a never-ending process. So prioritize the problem, talk to the recruiters on the ground, ideally get feedback from candidates on their experience, then review your options and then ask how you can measure that success. And then you can start to look at products, implementation, flow through the recruitment funnel, etc., and measure that against the cost and likelihood of success. And as promised, that was the last slide. So I'm concluding my presentation there, but I'd be delighted to hear any questions that anyone has.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alex, for the insights and the new learning experiences that you have shared among our participants. What you have presented is truly interesting. Over the last years, we have noted that the human resource management has experienced significant transformations because of technology, the integration of technology, and mainly the focus then was from administrative tasks to becoming now a strategic partner of the overall organization strategy. You have supported the progress of the human resource knowledge area. And what is fantastic about the presentation is that SeeMeCV is just did not revolutionize the hiring process, but you
Mhm.
also ensure that the positive customer experience will be achieved
Absolutely.
as well. So PSQ Nation, did you learn something new in today's session? Kindly
I
type
hope so.
in yes in our comment boxes. And let me hear and let me read some of the greetings coming from our Facebook and YouTube platforms. We have from We have greetings from Ma'am Liza Igbuhay, Ma'am Lorena Balacana, from Lee Andy Andres. He says, thank you, PSQ, for this one. RJ Cortez is also saying good afternoon, similar with Jermaine, Jerry, Terry, Joey, Alexis, Juntaria. And also, we have participants from Cavite. Nice. Also, if you have learned something new about this session, we're opening this platform for our participants to raise questions or clarifications. Kindly just type it in your comment boxes and we will flash them on screen and I'll read them for you. So let's see. Let's see if we have some questions coming from our participants. It seems they are really overwhelmed with your presentation, Sir Alex. This is the first time I heard of a CV with AVP.
Right. Yeah.
Quite interesting. So I
This is where I was going to say I thank you everyone also just while we're waiting to see if there's any questions. I just want to thank you everyone for your attention as well. I know I have a habit of talking very quickly. This is the problem with being passionate about a topic. It's very hard for me to slow down.
it's all right,
But
Sir Alex.
yeah, but I
you're
certainly
able to
hope it was
capture
valuable.
you're able to capture what you have presented. And Ma'am Lisa is saying thank you for that informative session.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Thank you also for being with us this afternoon. So if we don't have any questions coming from our participants, I think they understood well the presentation. So at this juncture, of course, the participants will be receiving also their digital certificates once they have completed the survey this month. So kindly scan the QR code, flash on your screen, accomplish the survey, and you will be receiving your certificates via email from our Secretariat's office. And then at this point, of course, may I present to you the certificate to our resource speaker for imparting valuable
Ah,
insights and inspiration to the participants. Thank you so much during this PSQ's May 2022 International Webinar with the topic Using Technology to Improve Your Early Careers Hiring Process on May 6, 2022. PSQ's awards the Certificate of Appreciation, of course, to Mr. Alex Martin.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we appreciate your time. Ma'am Clarice
My
is also
pleasure.
saying thank you for the very informative presentation, similar with Ms. Rhea Perido.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Clarice. Thank you, Rhea. Thank you.
So at this point, may I present to you some backgrounders about PSQ. So we are a national professional nonprofit organization established last May 17 of 1969 in cooperation with the Productivity Development Center and 64 charter members. We are responsive to the training and certification activities of the industries. And these flash on your screen is the vision of the university. And if you want to be a member of the university, you will be enjoying a lot of benefits. That is our mission, flashed on your screen. We are a network of agile, innovative, and trusted individuals. And through the years, we have partnered with quality gurus. We have partnered with different local and international organizations for collaboration projects, which greatly benefit the members of our society. These are the organizations that we have partnered with, and we are providing also a lot of trainings related to quality, and also we have line up like including data privacy, design thinking, and we also facilitate several awards, one of which those Listed are, this includes the Geranmado, the Quality Manager of the Year Award, the Benchmarking Award, the Best Practice Award, and so on and so forth. And we also facilitates the highest national recognition for exemplary organizational performance of the private and public organizations in the country, known as the Philippine Quality Award. We also promote quality awareness and practices in both private and public sectors. So we encourage the development of members in the areas of quality leadership and technology. So if you are interested, kindly please get in touch with our secretariat or visit our website www.psq.org.ph for details. And we are very much looking forward to seeing you again on the various activities of the society. And you can reach PSQ via our social media platform. So please visit and like our sites to be updated of our activities. And we have come to the end of our webinar this afternoon. Thank you very much for all of you who have attended via Zoom, via StreamYard, via Facebook, via YouTube. And once again, good afternoon, everybody. God bless. And don't forget to exercise your right to vote on Monday. Thank you so much.